This is Channels Television's Breaking News.
Good afternoon. I'm Brooke Barron with Channels Television Breaking News. We just received word on the death of missionary Nathan Price, who seemed to have attempted to convert the Congolese to Christianity. It says here he and his family left for Kalanga almost 30 years ago, and his death was confirmed only minutes ago. He is currently survived by his wife and three out of his 4 daughters. We were able to make contact with the Ambassador of Cultural Relations, Solana Honda. Let's see if she has some light to shed on this subject. Before we head out, please note that this story may not be suitable for all audiences. And now, out to you, Solana.
I'm Solana Honda, reporting live from the Congo. I'm currently sitting inside the hut, which once housed the Price family, and after looking around, I have started to see some noticeable differences between how they may have lived and the lives of the surrounding Congolese villagers.
Do you think the differences in culture made their changed way of life so apparent? How would you compare the cultural values of the Price family versus the Congolese?
Well, based off the look of their housing alone, we can see a stark contrast in the quality and availability of any necessities which the surrounding villagers don't have the luxuries of receiving. As the typical American household, they seem to have carried around far more than simple needs, such as food and water. These American cultural values most likely had a large impact on the way the Price family handled their life in the Congo.
Were there many other differences?
Let's see. The radical differences in cultural values are fairly evident through the presence of guilt. One of the factors which caused guilt for many of the Price family was the death of Ruth May, which happened to take place right outside the hut. I was able to speak with both Leah and Orleana earlier this month on the topic of Ruth May's death, and it was clear her death brought upon many feelings for everyone involved. I was also able to get some inside information from overhearing the conversation between Anatole and Leah. The way he spoke truly struck a chord with the thoughts on how the Congolese view and accept death so differently from the ways the Price family continued to deal with the death of Ruth May. Anatole asked Leah, "Why do you think your sadness is so special? Children died every day in Kalanga. They are dying here and now. The people in Kalanga are surrounded by death on a daily basis. They cannot handle the loss of life in nearly the same way in which the Price family handled the loss of Ruth May. Death is simply a part of life here, and they don't seem to see a reason to feel guilt over a natural occurrence. Guilt simply isn't practical, and therefore left out of their way of life."
How would you interpret guilt within the Congolese people versus the Americans?
Well, after taking a look around and talking to some of the native villagers, it seems to me the Congolese don't perceive guilt in the same way most Americans do. I think it's pretty clear how guilt affected the Price family with the recent death of Nathan Price. I'm sure the Congolese think their struggles to be very American, as the Price family was torn apart by the force of guilt, which is seemingly unfelt by those here in Kalanga.
Do these cultural values play a role in the process of guilt of the Americans versus the Congolese?
Cultural values continue to play a huge role in the process of guilt because, as we have seen, Americans such as the Price family felt they needed a place to blame on or someone to blame. They needed a reason behind these happenings. It seems as Americans, they need closure and an explanation for everything that happens. In the Congo, however, people know when death is upon them, it is simply another drought, disease, or the beast of starvation. Then they mourn and move on to protect the other children. Guilt is simply not practical here. Perhaps it is because the seed of guilt has no place to grow in the Congo that the Price family failed so miserably in their mission. Back to you, Brooke.
Thank you, Solana. We are now going to talk to behavioral psychologist and therapist Dr. Morgan Perez. She will help us dive into the behavior and lifestyle of Nathan Price. Out to you, Morgan. What do you feel drove Nathan to leave for the Congo in 1959 with his wife and 4 daughters?
Well, if we look into Nathan's past, we can see a cause of post-traumatic stress disorder after he left the war. After he was injured, he felt guilty because later on he received word his men had died. When he found out, he was extremely distressed and felt God was punishing him by making him live with the guilt of being a weak coward for going home. Nathan was obsessed with pleasing God in an unhealthy way. It's good to have faith if that's what one chooses, but in this case, he was acting as an extremist because he seemed to take the word of the Bible to a literal meaning, thus leading him to the Congo because he thought the more people he could save, the less guilt and shame he would feel towards God. But he showed signs of arrogant behavior because he never considered the long-term consequences his family would endure.
How did his guilt change his interaction with his family?
Well, when Nathan returned home back to his wife after the war, he was angry and found his wife to be sinful for many things she could not control. For instance, I reviewed his wife, and she said he blamed her for being beautiful, which is clearly not something you can control. But Nathan was trying to imitate God versus a healthy relationship with his God. As for his children, he seemed almost ashamed of them because he saw them as a sin from his past sins. The only interaction he had with his daughters was when he was teaching or disciplining his girls with the Word of God, which would cause them to feel guilty and confused because they did not have any explanation of what they did to deserve punishment. The guilt of his past war experience has led relations to any humans to deteriorate, which is an unhealthy cause because every human needs relationships and should not isolate themselves from others. If this were to occur, the effects we see may become detrimental to our mental state.
Did Nathan's guilt affect anyone in his family?
No doubt about it. Life was focused around God, and he lived as if he had no children, only members of his congregation. He seemed to care more about how devoted his family was to God instead of them as individual people. This can be a developmental problem with his daughters because girls should have a balance of mom and dad in their life. Instead of using religion as a positive reinforcement to the lives of his daughters, he used the words of the Bible to punish them when they disobeyed his orders. Religion is supposed to bring people together, but because the way Nathan practiced religion, he allowed it to tear them apart. By punishing them using the words of the Bible, he eventually led his daughters to no longer have faith in God or in their father.
How did his guilt change after his daughter's death?
Because his youngest daughter, Ruth May, was not baptized, he did not care to change any of his actions following her death. When one person has lived a certain way for a long period of time, they are no longer apt to change. This was a surprising effect, though, because it usually takes a huge event to alter one's life. And yet all he cared about was the state of Ruth May's soul. That is when I discovered no event could be big enough to change the way he wanted to live with his life with God. Back to you, Brooke.
Thank you, Dr. Perez. This concludes our coverage on Nathan Price. We will have more information later. We thank you again for tuning in, and we will now return you to your regularly scheduled programming. Have a good evening.